The stars were quiet. In the deep black of space, a single human warship floated alone. Its name was Valkyrie, and it was the last of its kind. Once, Earth had many ships, many colonies, and many heroes. But now, only one warship remained. The rest had been destroyed in the long war against the Galactic Union. Captain Raylan stood on the command deck of Valkyrie. He was tall, silent, and calm. His eyes watched the large screen in front of him. On it, red dots filled the map. Enemy ships, hundreds of them, closing in fast. They were coming from all sides. The Galactic fleet had gathered the largest armada in history, just to destroy one last human ship. "They think we are weak," Raylan said softly. His crew sat at their stations, silent. There were only 20 of them left. They had all lost friends, families, and homes. They had nothing left to lose. But Raylan still had something. A plan. "Why don't we run?" asked Lieutenant Mira, her voice quiet. "Because we are the last," Raylan said. "If we run, humanity dies forgotten. If we stand, they will remember." Outside, the alien fleet moved closer. Ships from dozens of species, glowing with power, ready to end the human threat forever. In the center of their fleet, the Grand Commander of the Galactic Union watched the Valkyrie through his screen. He smiled. To him, it was already over. "Send the message," the Grand Commander ordered. A signal was sent to the human ship. "This is the Galactic Union. You are surrounded. Surrender now, and we will show mercy." Inside Valkyrie, the message played. The crew looked at Captain Raylan. Would he answer? He pressed the comms button. "This is Captain Raylan of the Valkyrie," he said. "No surrender." That was all he said. Then he turned off the screen. The crew felt a strange energy fill the room. Fear, yes, but also pride. Their captain would not beg. He would fight. The alien fleet started to move into position. Thousands of weapons locked onto the human ship. Raylan did not move. He stood still, thinking. He walked slowly to the center of the deck and placed his hand on a scanner. A hidden panel opened, revealing a glowing red button. The room dimmed. The ship's AI spoke. "Core systems unlocked. Ancient tech online. Awaiting your orders." The crew stared. They had heard rumors about the hidden systems on Valkyrie. Old Earth technology, too powerful to use during peace. No one had seen it work. Until now. Raylan spoke again, his voice calm and clear. "They think they've won. Let's show them what one human ship can do." The ship began to hum. Energy flowed through the walls. The lights flickered blue. Outside, the alien fleet stopped for a moment. Their scanners picked up strange readings. Power levels too high. Movements too fast. "They're charging weapons," said Mira. "We have 20 seconds." Raylan smiled. "Then we hit first." With one command, the Valkyrie disappeared. Not destroyed. Not hit. It simply vanished. The alien fleet went silent. "Where did it go?" asked one of the alien captains. Before they could answer, one of the enemy ships exploded. Then another. Then 5 more. Panic filled the Galactic fleet. The Valkyrie reappeared for just a second, right in the middle of the formation, then vanished again. Each time it appeared, another ship was destroyed. "They're teleporting," someone shouted. "That shouldn't be possible." On board the Valkyrie, Mira looked at the captain. "How are we doing this?" Raylan looked at the screen. "We were never weaker than them," he said. "We were just waiting for the right moment." The AI spoke again. 17 enemy ships down. 0 damage to hull. "Shall we continue?" Raylan nodded. "Let's make them afraid." Outside, the rest of the fleet tried to regroup. They fired in every direction, but their weapons hit nothing. They screamed orders, but no one knew what to do. The enemy they thought would die easily was now hunting them, one by one. The galaxy watched in silence. Billions of beings across star systems tuned into the live feed. They expected to see Earth's last ship fall. Instead, they saw a ghost in the dark, striking with deadly power. Captain Raylan stood tall, his voice calm as ever. "Send this message to the Grand Commander," he said. Mira blinked. "What should I say?" Raylan looked out at the stars. "Tell him." Big mistake. Raylan stood in the center of the command deck, staring at the empty space on the screen. The battle had just begun, and already the enemy fleet was in chaos. The Valkyrie had torn through their ranks with shocking speed and precision, but the captain knew that this was only the start. The real fight hadn't even begun yet. Lieutenant Mira glanced nervously at the captain, watching him closely. She had seen the calm before a storm in Raylan's eyes, but never like this. Something about his resolve was different. It was as if he had known this moment would come, that they would be alone, and that only a single ship could make the difference. "Captain," Mira said hesitantly, "how do we keep this up? They have hundreds of ships. We can't keep vanishing and reappearing forever." Raylan's voice was quiet but filled with authority. "We don't have to. We have something they don't. Knowledge, preparation, and strategy. We fight smarter, not harder." Mira's confusion was visible, but she didn't question him. Instead, she watched as Raylan turned to the screen again. The distant stars outside the Valkyrie seemed to stretch on endlessly, but each light on the radar now represented an enemy ship, circling in confusion. "We've only revealed a fraction of what Valkyrie can do," Raylan continued. "This ship wasn't designed just to survive. It was designed to make a statement." The crew had been wondering for a while. They had heard stories of Earth's ancient technology, advanced systems that could bend the rules of physics, but this was the first time they had seen it in action. The human warship was using a form of teleportation, moving faster than any fleet could track, striking with devastating force, and then disappearing before the enemy could respond. It was like watching a ghost tearing through solid matter. But Raylan wasn't going to rely on this power alone. As the AI monitored enemy movements, Raylan stepped forward, his fingers tapping the console with practiced ease. "Prepare the silent core. We're about to show them why they should fear us." The crew exchanged looks of shock. The silent core had been locked away for years, only mentioned in hushed tones by the officers who had worked on it before the war. It was a weapon, yes, but not one that anyone had hoped to use. "What are you planning, Captain?" Mira asked. "We need them to feel it, Mira," Raylan replied, his voice steady. "To know that no matter how many ships they have, it only takes one human to change the rules." The silent core was an ancient Earth technology designed to manipulate time itself. When activated, it created a window where the laws of time twisted for just a few seconds, enough to change the tide of any battle. And right now, that was exactly what Raylan needed. If they couldn't outfight the Galactic fleet in numbers, they could at least control the tempo of the battle. He pressed a sequence of buttons, and the hum of energy in the ship grew louder. The entire Valkyrie seemed to vibrate, as if it was preparing to do something it had never done before. Then, Raylan gave the order. "Activate silent core." Immediately, everything in the Valkyrie went dark. The lights flickered and the ship fell into an eerie silence. Time itself seemed to slow. On the outside, the enemy fleet was frozen in place, their weapons aimed, but their movements no longer fluid. Within the gap of that time window, Raylan ordered the ship to move. Full power to the engines, no hesitation. Now, the Valkyrie shot forward at an impossible speed. For just a few precious seconds, the entire alien fleet was suspended in time. The Valkyrie darted between the ships, dodging weapon fire that could have destroyed it in an instant. One by one, Raylan gave the command, and with every precise strike, enemy ships vanished from existence, reduced to nothing but debris floating in space. The crew watched in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. One moment, the enemy ships were there. The next, they were gone. "What the hell just happened?" Mira whispered. Raylan's calm smile was all that was left of him. We just changed the rules of war. They'll never see us coming again. When the silent core's effect finally wore off, the alien fleet was in complete disarray. The Valkyrie reappeared at the edge of the battle, untouched, while the enemy ships were still trying to understand what had happened. The sensors were flooded with errors. Communications were jammed. For the first time, the Galactic fleet had no control over the battle. Raylan turned to his crew, and for the first time, he allowed himself a small smirk. They've been playing checkers. We've been playing chess. The AI's voice echoed in the silence. 85 ships down, Captain. The rest are scattered. Mira was still in shock. What do we do now? The rest of their fleet is still out there. Raylan didn't move. He simply turned to face the window, where the stars blinked coldly back at him. We finish what we started. This is the last time they'll think they can destroy humanity. And with that, the hunt began. The chaos in the galaxy had only just begun. The Valkyrie had struck first, but Raylan knew this was just a warning shot. The Galactic fleet was not one to back down easily. They would regroup, adapt, and come at them with everything they had. The question was, would they be ready for what came next? Captain Raylan stood at the center of the command deck, his eyes locked on the map of enemy ships. The Valkyrie was hidden in the dark corners of space, moving through the shadows, striking when the enemy least expected it. The crew had a sense of urgency now, as if they had seen the impossible and knew they were in the middle of a battle that would change the galaxy forever. Yet Raylan remained calm, his focus unwavering. Enemy ships are starting to regroup, Mira said, her voice tense. They're attempting to coordinate. If they're smart, they'll change their strategy. If they're not, they'll be gone. Raylan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he focused on the flickering lights on the screen. The alien fleet was broken, scattered, but not beaten. And now they were adjusting, trying to find the human warship, trying to figure out how to destroy it. We won't be playing by their rules, Raylan finally said, his voice low but confident. I gave them a taste of what's coming. Now it's time to hit them where it hurts. He turned to his crew, his eyes burning with intensity. We know they'll try to trap us, herd us into their firing range. They'll send scouts to find us. And when they do, we'll be ready. Raylan motioned to the tactical officer, who quickly brought up a projection of the enemy fleet's movements. They're setting up a perimeter around the Valkyrie's last position. They're trying to block our escape routes. The captain nodded. This was exactly what he had expected. The Galactic fleet, though large and powerful, wasn't known for its adaptability. Raylan knew they had already underestimated the human warship once, and he was sure they would do it again. Activate phase shifter, he ordered. The crew's faces shifted from concern to curiosity. The phase shifter was another secret weapon aboard the Valkyrie, a piece of technology that allowed the ship to shift through different layers of space, much like bending reality itself. It wasn't as reliable as the silent core, but it had its uses, especially when they needed to escape or avoid detection. Phase shifter online, Mira said. But Captain, if we use it, we'll be flying blind for a while. We won't be able to get precise readings of the enemy. I know, Raylan replied, but we don't need to see them. We need to make them think we're already gone. The AI's voice interrupted, cutting through the tense silence. Phase shifter engage. We are now shifting to alternate dimensions. All systems are stable. The ship hummed as the Valkyrie shifted into a different layer of space, a ghostly quiet dimension where light barely reached. It was a place where enemies couldn't track them, couldn't see them. Time felt slower here, and Raylan knew it would buy them precious minutes. They drifted through the alternate space, just out of reach of the alien fleet. Raylan took a breath, watching the slowly flickering stars that surrounded them. The silence was almost peaceful, but that peace was temporary. He knew that. Prepare for Phase 2, Raylan said, his voice sharp. We won't be waiting here long. After a few minutes, Raylan ordered the Valkyrie to return to normal space, just outside the enemy perimeter. The fleet was still scattered, and though they knew something was amiss, they had no idea where the Valkyrie had gone. Raylan stood again, his eyes narrowed. He could feel the tension building. The enemy was playing a guessing game, and he was going to make them pay for it. "Now we strike hard," he said, standing tall. "Take the fight to them. We're not hiding anymore." The crew quickly went to work. They knew what to do now. The Valkyrie would become a ghost once more, slipping through the cracks of space and reappearing where the enemy least expected it. The Valkyrie was moving at unimaginable speeds, and soon, Raylan's command was more than just a plan. It was a warpath. The alien fleet was still in disarray, their attempts to regain order failing. They were sending more and more ships into the area, trying to make sense of the battle. It was chaos on their side, and they didn't even know how to respond. Raylan gave the order, "Move in, keep them guessing." And that's when it happened. The Valkyrie reappeared, not in the heart of the fleet, but on the edge of their formation. The ship fired once, its blast sharp and deadly. The nearest enemy ship exploded in a burst of light and debris. Before they could react, the Valkyrie was gone again, disappearing back into the dark void. A few moments later, the same thing happened again. And again. Each time, an enemy ship was destroyed, and the Valkyrie disappeared before they could fire a single shot. Panic began to set in across the fleet. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. "They can't track us. They can't even hit us," Mira said, her voice filled with awe. Raylan only nodded. His eyes never left the screen. The strategy was working. They had created confusion, turned the battlefield into a puzzle, and now the enemy was scrambling to find the pieces. He gave a small smile. "The first wave is ours. They'll never know what hit them." The fleet was now in full retreat, but Raylan knew better. This was just the beginning. The Galactic fleet might have 1,000 ships, but the Valkyrie was a warship unlike any other. And it wasn't just about power. It was about making a statement. Raylan's eyes never wavered from the screen. This is what happens when you underestimate humanity. The battle was far from over. But now Raylan had the upper hand, and he planned to keep it. The battle was far from over, but the Valkyrie had already delivered a shockwave across the stars. The Galactic fleet, once so confident in their numbers, was now drowning in confusion and fear. They had lost ship after ship, their once pristine formation now a mess of scattered debris and frantic orders. Raylan watched it all unfold, his face impassive, but inside, he was calculating the next move. The Valkyrie had the advantage now, but this wouldn't last forever. "Captain, the enemy is regrouping," Mira reported, her voice strained. She couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. "They're sending ships to block off our escape routes. They're getting smarter." Raylan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the flickering lights on the radar screen. The fleet had spread out across the battlefield, adjusting its tactics, trying to predict where the Valkyrie would strike next. They were getting closer, cornering the human warship. Raylan could feel the pressure mounting, but he also knew that the Galactic fleet was still far from ready for what the Valkyrie could do. "Don't underestimate them," Raylan finally said, his voice calm. "They'll adjust, but they don't know the full extent of what we can do." The AI chimed in, its mechanical voice cutting through the tense silence. "The Galactic fleet is now adopting a defensive perimeter. They have activated full shields and are launching probes to detect our position. We need to move fast," Raylan said, his voice sharp with urgency. "Get us to the edge of their formation. We need them to think we're retreating." Mira's eyes widened. "Are you sure about this? If we go near their perimeter?" "We're not retreating, Mira," Raylan interrupted. "We're luring them in. They think they've got us figured out. We're going to make them chase shadows." The Valkyrie silently slipped through the void, its stealth systems activated to near-perfect efficiency. The alien fleet had no idea that the human warship was already behind their lines, hidden in the dark abyss. Raylan's plan was simple: give them just enough to believe they had the upper hand, and then strike when they least expected it. Outside, the alien ships began to adjust their shields, expecting a direct attack. Some of them began to move in formation, trying to box in the Valkyrie. Others launched probes, looking for any sign of human presence, but they were only seeing what Raylan wanted them to see: empty space. For a brief moment, everything was quiet. The crew was tense, waiting for the next move, knowing that at any second, the trap could either succeed or fail. Raylan's calm demeanor never faltered. He had a plan. He always had a plan. And right now, the plan was simple: make them believe they had won. "Deploy decoys," he ordered. Mira's hands flew across the console as she activated the decoy systems. Dozens of small drones, indistinguishable from the Valkyrie, launched into space. They glided silently, mimicking the movements of the human ship. The enemy fleet's sensors picked them up immediately, and for a brief moment, the Valkyrie disappeared from view, replaced by the swarm of drones. It was working. The enemy fleet reacted quickly, firing their weapons at the decoys. Explosions lit up the dark space as the drones disintegrated one by one. But Raylan knew something the Galactic fleet didn't. The real Valkyrie wasn't anywhere near the decoys. While they were distracted, the real ship was already positioning itself for the next strike. "Take us to their flagship," Raylan commanded. The Valkyrie moved swiftly through the void, undetected, as the enemy fleet continued its relentless assault on the decoys. In just a few moments, they would realize their mistake. But by then, it would be too late. The flagship of the Galactic fleet was a massive vessel, a command center surrounded by layers of heavy shields. It was the heart of the fleet, and destroying it would send a clear message: humanity was not to be trifled with. The Valkyrie silently approached, its engines humming with quiet power. The crew held their breath, watching the screen as the flagship grew larger, its shields glowing brightly in the distance. "Target locked," the AI announced. "Shields are too strong for a direct hit. Recommend targeting the auxiliary power core." Raylan's lips curled into a grim smile. "That's exactly where we're going." The Valkyrie slowed to a crawl as it entered range. The crew could feel the tension building in the air. Every instinct told them to hesitate, to wait for another moment. But Raylan had never been one to wait. He'd given them enough time to regroup, and now it was time to finish it. "Full power to the engines. We're going in." The Valkyrie surged forward, its guns charged and ready. The alien fleet, still focused on the decoys, didn't even see the human warship coming. The flagship loomed closer, its shields practically humming with energy. But Raylan knew exactly how to break them. "Activate silent core," he ordered. "We hit them hard, and we hit them fast." The Valkyrie disappeared in the blink of an eye, and for a fraction of a second, the flagship was wide open. In that moment, Raylan's orders were clear. The Valkyrie reappeared, its weapons firing with deadly precision. The first blast hit the shields, but the next hit was aimed directly at the auxiliary power core, just as Raylan had planned. The flagship trembled as the blast tore through its defenses. A chain reaction began, and in seconds, the flagship's core exploded in a massive burst of light and energy. The shockwave rippled through the surrounding ships, and the entire fleet staggered. "Direct hit," Mira breathed. "The flagship is down." The rest of the enemy fleet scattered. But Raylan wasn't done. He knew the moment they realized their flagship was destroyed, they'd lose all coordination. He gave the order to hunt down the remaining ships, one by one. The Galactic fleet was on the run now, each ship desperate to escape the wrath of the Valkyrie. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would feel the consequences. Raylan had proven that it wasn't just about firepower. It was about strategy, precision, and the willingness to strike when it mattered most. And as the Valkyrie hunted down the last of the enemy fleet, Raylan's voice echoed in the command deck. no mercy. The aftermath of the battle had left the stars eerily quiet. The enemy fleet was scattered across the galaxy, with wreckage and debris floating in the cold expanse of space. Raylan watched the display as the last of the enemy ships blinked out of existence, one by one, swallowed by the darkness or destroyed in quick, precise strikes from the Valkyrie. The calm after the storm was deceptive. Raylan knew that the Galactic fleet wouldn't stay down for long. They had lost many ships, but they were not an enemy that would simply fade away. The human warship had proven its power, but it had also revealed its vulnerabilities. The enemy was smart, and they would come back. But for now, the Valkyrie had earned a temporary victory. "Captain, all remaining enemy ships have retreated," Mira said, her voice strained from the intensity of the battle. She glanced at the damaged systems still flickering on the display. "Damage reports are coming in. We've lost some power in the aft shields, and several communication relays are down. It'll take hours to fully repair." Raylan stood up from the command chair and walked to the window, looking out at the dark void. The galaxy stretched before him, quiet and still, almost as if it were holding its breath. "We'll survive. We always do." Mira nodded but said nothing. She knew Raylan's resolve. She had seen it before, in battles where survival was never a guarantee, but Raylan had always found a way. The crew trusted him, and it was that trust that kept them going even in the face of overwhelming odds. "Are we ready for the next wave?" she asked, knowing the answer before Raylan even spoke. Raylan turned, his eyes cold and calculating. "We don't wait for the next wave. We go to them." The Valkyrie was more than just a warship. It was a symbol of humanity's defiance against a galaxy that had once thought it could crush them underfoot. Raylan understood that. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for the future of mankind. The crew had seen what their ship could do, and they had felt the power that surged through them when they took down the Galactic fleet's flagship. But the reality was that one battle didn't win a war. The fight had just begun. Raylan walked over to the holomap, the glowing blue projection of the galaxy. He watched as the last remnants of the enemy fleet drifted into the depths of space, searching for a way to lick their wounds and regroup. Their retreat wasn't out of fear, it was a strategic move. Raylan had known that from the start. But this wasn't just about the ships. It was about breaking their will to fight. "Set a course for the Aryan Nebula," Raylan said, his voice steady and filled with purpose. "We're going to hit their supply lines, cut them off before they can regroup. It's time to send a message they can't ignore." The Aryan Nebula was a dense cloud of gas and dust, a natural barrier that was difficult to navigate without precise calculations. The Galactic fleet had set up supply stations near its edges, thinking it was a safe place to hide their resources. But Raylan knew better. The Valkyrie had been built to operate in places like the nebula, where the normal rules of navigation didn't apply. "Captain," Mira spoke up, "if we go after their supply lines, we're cutting off the resources they need to rebuild. But we're also going to be making ourselves a target. We don't have the manpower to take on another full-scale battle right now." Raylan turned to face her, his eyes locked onto hers. "I know. But that's exactly why we're doing this. We can't wait for them to rebuild. We need to keep the pressure on." The room fell silent as the crew absorbed his words. There was no room for hesitation now. They had already taken on an entire fleet and come out victorious. They had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of, but Raylan knew that wouldn't be enough. He had to keep them guessing, keep them on the edge, and hitting the supply lines would do just that. With the coordinates set, the Valkyrie began its journey toward the Aryan Nebula. As it slipped through the vast emptiness, Raylan stood at the front of the deck, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. The next move had to be flawless. One mistake, and they would be exposed. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. The crew worked in sync, their movements precise as they prepared for the next operation. Raylan watched them, his mind sharp, his thoughts cutting through the fog of the war. The battle had been a victory, but it was only a step on the path. What mattered now was how far they were willing to go. "We've got one shot at this," Raylan said, his voice low, but powerful. "We take out their supply lines, we disrupt their entire operation, and when they come for us next time, they won't know where to find us." The Aryan Nebula loomed closer, a massive swirling mass of gas and dust. It was a place of confusion, where even the most advanced sensors couldn't get a clear read on the area. But the Valkyrie was no ordinary ship. It was designed to move through this chaos, using stealth and cunning to remain unseen. Raylan stood with his crew as the Valkyrie entered the nebula's edge. The sensors began to flicker, but Raylan wasn't worried. He knew that they had the advantage. The Valkyrie's systems were optimized for situations like this, where standard navigation methods would fail. "Prepare for insertion," Raylan ordered, his voice firm and commanding. "We'll move in close, hit their supply station hard, and get out before they even realize we're there." As the Valkyrie drifted deeper into the nebula, the crew readied themselves for the upcoming strike. Raylan's mind raced with the calculations, his fingers moving over the console as he prepared the ship for the next phase. They would need to be quick, fast enough to deliver a crippling blow and vanish into the thick clouds before the Galactic fleet could respond. The tension in the command deck was palpable. Every crew member knew that this operation could make or break the war. If they succeeded, they would throw the entire fleet into disarray. If they failed, it would be their last mission. Raylan didn't doubt for a second that they would succeed. He had the advantage, and humanity's will to fight would carry them through. As the Valkyrie slipped into the heart of the nebula, the darkness of space seemed to close in around them, but Raylan knew one thing for sure. They were ready. The Valkyrie was more than just a ship. It was a message. And no one would ever forget what humanity was capable of. The Valkyrie moved like a shadow through the dense gas of the Aryan Nebula. The crew remained eerily quiet as the ship glided deeper into the swirling clouds of dust and ionized particles. Raylan stood at the helm, his eyes sharp, scanning every flicker of light, every change in the sensor readouts. This was the kind of mission where hesitation meant death. Every move had to be precise. Every second counted. "We're almost at the target coordinates," Mira said, her voice steady but laced with tension. "The enemy's supply station should be in range shortly." Raylan nodded, his fingers hovering over the console. He knew the stakes. If they were caught in the nebula, it wouldn't just be a battle. It would be a trap. The Galactic fleet was no stranger to stealth tactics, and Raylan had no doubt they would be waiting for the Valkyrie to make its move. But that was the plan. Draw them in. Make them think they had the upper hand. "Deploy the cloaking field," Raylan ordered, his voice low but firm. The ship hummed as the cloaking technology kicked in, shrouding the Valkyrie in a field of distortion. To the naked eye, and to most sensors, the ship would appear as nothing more than a ripple in the fabric of space. It was their best chance at moving undetected, but Raylan knew it wasn't perfect. If they got too close or moved too quickly, the field could be compromised. And that was a risk they couldn't afford to take. For a moment, the crew held their breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion of sound and activity that would signal they had been detected. But the ship remained silent, floating through the gas clouds, as though it were part of the nebula itself. Raylan could feel the tension building. It was like a game of cat and mouse, and they were the mouse. "Captain," Mira spoke again, her eyes focused on the glowing red markers on the screen. "The supply station is just ahead. We've got no more than 2 minutes to strike before we risk getting caught in the perimeter scanners. If we don't hit them fast, they'll know we're here." Raylan's eyes narrowed as he studied the layout of the enemy station. It wasn't heavily armed, but it was surrounded by a tight defensive grid. There were a handful of enemy ships docked at the station, likely there for resupply and repairs. The trick was to hit them before they had time to respond, hit them so hard that they wouldn't have the time or resources to alert the fleet. "We'll make our move now," Raylan said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. The Valkyrie surged forward, its engines kicking into high gear as it maneuvered silently toward the supply station. Raylan's heart pounded in his chest as they neared their target. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. One mistake, and everything would fall apart. But Raylan had no intention of making a mistake. The ship's AI tracked their movements, keeping them on course with precision. Raylan watched as the supply station grew larger on the screen, a cluster of ships and machinery surrounded by an array of defensive shields. It was just as Raylan had expected. The station's systems were old, not designed to handle the kind of high-tech attack that was coming their way. The Valkyrie wasn't just a warship. It was a surgical instrument, ready to strike with deadly accuracy. "Prepare to breach," Raylan said, his tone cool but sharp. "On my mark, we take out their shields and cripple their main generators. We can't waste time." Mira nodded, her fingers dancing across the console as she prepared the weapon systems. "All systems are primed, Captain. We're ready." The final moments seemed to stretch on forever. Raylan's hand hovered over the button that would trigger the attack. His mind raced, calculating the exact timing. He could feel his breath steadying as the Valkyrie slid into position, just outside the range of the enemy's detection. "Now," Raylan barked. The Valkyrie erupted from the cloak, its weapons firing in a coordinated barrage of energy blasts. The first strike hit the enemy station's outer shield, tearing through its defenses with surgical precision. A ripple of energy flashed outward, but the Valkyrie didn't slow down. The ship surged forward, launching more blasts aimed at the core of the station. The enemy ships in the vicinity scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The Valkyrie was already on top of them, firing at close range. The first of the enemy vessels was caught in the explosion as the Valkyrie tore through its hull, disintegrating it in a burst of flame and debris. The second ship attempted to retaliate, but the Valkyrie was already gone, having darted to the other side of the station. The crew worked in perfect synchronization, each member focused on their task. Mira continued to target the enemy ships, taking out their weapons and power systems with brutal efficiency. Raylan stood at the helm, watching as the destruction unfolded. He knew they didn't have much time. Once the Galactic fleet realized what was happening, they would mobilize every available ship to hunt them down. But for now, the Valkyrie was a ghost in the storm, slipping in and out of the chaos, wreaking havoc on the enemy supply lines. Another explosion rocked the station, and the lights flickered briefly. The shields were failing. Raylan could see the core of the station now, vulnerable and exposed. The next shot would cripple it entirely. "Target the core," Raylan commanded, his voice steady, though his adrenaline was coursing through his veins. "We end this now." Mira fired again, and this time the blast hit the station's power core directly. The explosion was deafening, a shockwave that rippled through the entire nebula. The station cracked open like an eggshell, its remaining ships and equipment disintegrating in a brilliant burst of energy. For a moment, it seemed as if the stars themselves had exploded in a blaze of light. The Valkyrie pulled back, disappearing into the nebula once again, just as the enemy fleet began to react to the destruction. Their response was frantic. Ships moved to block escape routes, but they were too late. The Valkyrie was already out of range, slipping away into the gas clouds, invisible and untouchable. Raylan allowed himself a brief moment to exhale. That was too close, he muttered to no one in particular. But the victory was undeniable. They had crippled the Galactic fleet's supply lines in a single strike, and they had done it without a scratch on the Valkyrie. Mira glanced at the screen. "The station's destroyed, Captain. No sign of pursuit." "Good," Raylan said. "Now we move. They'll regroup, but we'll be ready." The Valkyrie disappeared into the depths of the nebula once more, leaving behind nothing but the shattered remains of the enemy's infrastructure and the promise of more battles to come. Raylan stood at the front of the command deck, his eyes locked on the swirling chaos of the nebula. The war was far from over, But humanity had just sent a message loud and clear, and Raylan was more determined than ever to see it through. The victory at the Aryan Nebula was a momentary lull in the storm of war. The Valkyrie had dealt a devastating blow to the Galactic fleet, crippling their supply lines and forcing them to regroup. But Raylan knew better than to think this was the end. The enemies they faced were ruthless and resilient, and their next move would be even more brutal. Still, for a brief time, the crew of the Valkyrie had the satisfaction of knowing they had won, and that feeling gave them the edge they needed for what was to come. Raylan stood in the command deck, his gaze steady and distant as he stared out at the vast expanse of space. His mind was already calculating the next move. He knew that the fleet wouldn't let their defeat go unanswered, and he had no doubt that the next battle would be fiercer, more calculated. But the Valkyrie had proven itself, and humanity had proven its resolve. They were no longer just the underdogs. They were a force to be reckoned with. "Captain, we've received a message from the fleet," Mira said, breaking his thoughts. Her voice was a mix of curiosity and caution, as though she wasn't sure whether this was good news or bad. Raylan turned to her, his brow furrowed. "What does it say?" Mira glanced at the screen, reading the message aloud. "They know what we did in the nebula. The Galactic fleet has issued a directive to all its commanders. They're coming for us. All available ships are to converge on the Valkyrie's last known coordinates." Raylan clenched his fists, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. They knew they had struck a nerve, but now the real test began. It was only a matter of time. We've shaken the hornet's nest, and now they'll swarm. "Their fleet is massive, Captain," Mira warned, her voice tinged with concern. "We won't be able to keep them at bay for long. Even with the Valkyrie's stealth systems, there's only so much we can do." Raylan's eyes narrowed, and he walked over to the holographic display of the galaxy that lit up the room. His fingers traced the paths of the enemy ships as they plotted their way toward the Valkyrie's last known position. "Then we don't wait for them," Raylan said firmly. "We go to them. But we need to make sure we're not where they think we are." Mira looked up from her station, her eyebrows raised in curiosity. "What's your plan, Captain?" "We take the fight to their doorstep," Raylan said, his voice resolute. "We won't hide. We'll draw them out into open space, away from their strongholds, and hit them where it hurts." The crew around him exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable but filled with determination. They knew what Raylan was suggesting: a direct assault, not on a weak point, but on their entire fleet. It was risky, maybe even reckless, but if they could pull it off, it would send a message that no one would ever forget. "We can't just rely on stealth," Raylan continued, pacing in front of the crew. "We need to take out their command structure, disrupt their communication, and hit their supply lines again. If we make it impossible for them to coordinate, we can pick them off one by one." Mira's face softened slightly as she processed the plan. "You want to go after their heart, the core of their fleet. It's dangerous, but it could work. But what about the Valkyrie's resources? We're low on supplies after the nebula strike." Raylan stopped pacing and looked her in the eyes. "We'll scavenge what we can from the wreckage we left behind. The fleet will be too focused on hunting us down to notice us picking off their debris. We'll make do." The crew rallied around the plan, their doubts fading as they saw the conviction in their captain's eyes. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to win. Raylan was determined to give them a future, to show the galaxy that humanity would never be broken. And they all trusted him to lead them there. As the Valkyrie prepared to move again, the crew worked in a blur of activity. The ship was refueled with what little they had left, and the systems were patched up as best as they could be. Raylan spent the hours before their departure in his private quarters, planning, strategizing, and preparing for the fight ahead. He knew this would be the toughest challenge they had faced yet, but he also knew they couldn't back down now. This was their moment to truly shine. "Captain," Mira said, her voice echoing through the comm system as the ship powered up for departure. "We're ready when you are." Raylan stood up, taking one last look at the Valkyrie. The ship was battered but alive, and its crew was the same. They were ready to face the next wave, to show the universe just what humanity could do when pushed to the edge. "Set a course for the Galactic Fleet's command center," Raylan ordered, his voice steady. "We're not running anymore. We're going to finish this." The Valkyrie's engines roared to life, and the ship surged forward, cutting through the darkness of space. The crew was silent, each person mentally preparing for what was coming. Raylan remained at the helm, his eyes locked on the stars ahead. He knew the road would be long, and the battles would be fierce. But he also knew this: humanity had taken its first step into the galaxy's most dangerous war, and they weren't going to stop until they had won. As the Valkyrie sped toward the heart of the Galactic Fleet, Raylan's mind was clear. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for a future where humanity could thrive, where they could stand proud and strong in the face of any enemy, any obstacle. The war was far from over, but the Valkyrie was no longer just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's indomitable will. And with Raylan leading them, they would push forward, no matter the cost. Because in the end, this fight wasn't just about victory. It was about sending a message to the galaxy: humanity would never be defeated.